Hey everyone, it's Keith. I'm glad you're able to make it. This is the first video interview in a series that we're addressing cloud optimization. The CIO in this video is going to explain to you how he's built a very large cloud infrastructure very successfully using some key metrics. One is going to be disruption. You really have to embrace disruption, not just for the organization, but for you personally and for your organization. Secondly, mindset. There's got to be a cultural mindset change to embrace this new platform and make it successful. And thirdly, we're going to talk about the how. It's easy to get caught up in the what we're doing and why we're doing it, but you also have to be focused on the how, because that's what makes these projects successful. So I'd like to introduce you to Paul Chapman, CIO of Box. Let's give a listen.
Paul, if you could just do a quick introduction.
Morning, Paul Chapman. I'm the CIO over at a company called Box. Been in technology for a long time, 30 plus years. Worked at some great companies, been very blessed. Worked at Sun Microsystems during their hypergrowth period, VMware during their hypergrowth period. Worked at HP, and now working at a born in the cloud, growing up digital company called Box.
So just to give us a little bit of a context, when you look at your internal operations, what percentage of your workloads are you guys running on the cloud now?
So we were born in the cloud company, so we're very fortunate in the fact that we started with somewhat of a clean sheet, and we're able to pretty much start in the cloud. So with the exception of some very small services, we're actually at about a 95+%. It's part of our guiding principles that it's a cloud first service that we move with.
Does that include private cloud and public cloud?
It is. It's primarily public in the terms of SaaS services that we bring together in an interoperability is key to our what we call our reference architecture. So it's made up of lots of different cloud services. Some of those are very specialty services that do a very specific function, and some of those are services that do more broader sets of functions, more of a stack of functions. And then we have a relatively smallish cloud footprint for a private cloud footprint, yeah.
So in generally speaking, what do you consider to be some of the big challenges that CIOs are facing now as they continue to migrate workloads to the cloud?
I think that there are a couple of things. I think first off, cloud is proven. I think that sort of getting into the debate of, unless it's religious belief as to why not move to the cloud, I mean, it's proven to be the way to have agility, speed, access to constant innovation, highly scalable, capacity you need it. You have capacity when you need it, reliability. Our overall service levels are higher. Innovation is more faster, and so I think that cloud from those aspects has proven to be the way forward. And I think that the challenges come down to two parts. I think first off, really thinking through the strategy of the how. A lot of organizations figure out what they need to do and why they need to do it. It's like, okay, I know what my destination in the cloud is. I know what sets of services I need to go after, but I have to migrate from an existing set of services that may be more on-premise or directly operationally owned. And so I think there's two parts to that. I think first off, it's the strategy for the how. Too often people will bring a value proposition based on what we need to do and why we need to do it, and then they figure out once the program has been approved, the how part. And the how needs to have a real thoughtful strategy to it, because in some cases there are certain roles that people were doing previously that don't exist in this new sets of services. Maybe it's operational roles, or maybe it's the way that people were running operations previously are now changing. That's the change management aspects. And I think the challenges often come down to the cultural sets of changes that might need to occur and organizational changes. What we do find, of course, in a cloud world is that you significantly reduce the direct operational overhead and responsibilities that you had in the existing sort of legacy environment. And when you have the direct operational responsibility shrinking, that actually is the give back of time to your organization to spend on higher value work. The problem is that you got to get people maybe in certain roles into new roles, and people that are entrenched in their behaviors of how they work and operate, working in a different way. That's the biggest challenges for me. It's not the cloud is not better. It's just that people resist because of the disruption that it's causing to their existing functions.
Is that part of the cultural shift that we were talking about that's required to really fully embrace cloud?
It can be, yeah, it can be. You know, I used to use this term called the frozen middle, which is like this middle part of the organization that gets very entrenched in the way it thinks, operates, and behaves. And when you look to drive change, you are looking to inject tension into the organization. And when you inject that tension into the organization because of change, often it can react with a resistance. And if that resistance is too much, programs fail, people give up, and things slow down. And then you get into this unfortunate sort of circle of, you know, of just not moving forward at a pace that the organization is looking for, and you end up with, you know, impatience, right? It's like our digital transformation, our move to the cloud is too slow, it's not happening fast enough. And ironically, in an organization that has a lot of what I would call sort of traditional or legacy environments, for the things that don't strategically differentiate you. See, the thing in the new world is it's all about speed to differentiating value. And how do you get speed to differentiating value? You know, I like to say change is mandatory. It's the suffering that's optional. And really, the reality of it is that you know, if you don't, you become irrelevant. And that's what I see happen with organizations today. I don't see organizations get disrupted by technology. If you look at all the disruptions that have been going on over the last 20 years, and we've lost 50% of the Fortune 500 in the last 20 years, it's more than one a month. And the reason for that is not driven by technology, it's enabled by technology. But if you look at the companies themselves, they think differently, operate differently, business model different. They have a different business model, different business operations, and a different way of thinking. And if you compare the two, that's what the biggest disruptor is. It's the new sort of digital company is thinking and behaving differently. And how do you get the existing organization to start thinking and behaving differently?
And how in the world does a CIO, with all this stuff that CIOs have going on these days, cloud, work from home, pandemics, you know, what's your thought on how should CIO even approach that? Is that HR people? Should they be managing that, or do CIOs manage this? And how do you do it?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think it is somewhat of a call it a team sport. You know, I was, you know, joined at the hip, I would say, with our head of HR, head of people, and our head of culture and diversity at the organization, even prior to COVID. But more so now, we're joined together more so than we ever were before. And it is absolutely I think an integration of culture, HR, and technology. It's not any one of those three independently doing things independently that don't create the outcome you're looking for. It really, and actually I have found that by being very closely connected with our head of HR and our culture, the types of conversations we have are very fascinating about how do we enable our employees. You know, we think about work as being a state of mind, not a location. How do we lead with empathy at the same time as driving change in an organization? You couldn't get probably more overnight change in most organizations than what happened with the COVID situation, or what's happening with the COVID situation. How organizations transitioned. Some companies haven't grown up in what you would call a work from anywhere culture. This is a culture thing. So technology is like, we have all the technology enablers, we have all the communication exchange services in place. You know, we have team collaboration, we have, you know, services like Box, you know, we have, you know, video services, you know, we have all these things that allow us to stay connected, like communication exchange fabric that allows us to stay connected. So then it's about the culture of the organization, its ability to adapt and change. You know, I think that what we're finding now is the philosophical beliefs as to why remote work wasn't more beneficial are actually breaking down now, and that's why they were philosophical beliefs. I think people are finding now with the ability to have more flexibility in their day, the opportunity to build a schedule that works for them now that they've transitioned. Some people are early starters and more productive in the morning. Some are more productive in the evening. They're night owls. We're starting to see a lot of that flexibility. We're missing some of the high fidelity interactions that we of course miss. And we can't fix, being tethered to labs or manufacturing floors where you're physically connected, which is why I think the future definitely looks like some hybrid form of, an significant increase of remote work from the pre-COVID days, but some blend of high fidelity interaction in sort of office space that will still be needed.
Yeah. And in your experience in the other jobs you've had, as you've seen this migration towards the cloud, clearly that requires a change in thinking from a CIO's perspective. You can't rely on the on-prem mentality any longer from a technology, process, or people point of view, I'm going to guess.
I would always say, as a back to my earlier point, I think that the slowest rate of change we'll ever experience is the one we're experiencing now. It's not going to slow down anytime soon, right? And I think if I look back at sort of the things that I was doing at VMware and how I was thinking about sort of technology and leadership there, it's different than how I was thinking about it at HP. It's different how I'm thinking about it at Boss. It's not one is right, one is wrong. They're just born at different times and grew up at different times. And so the thing that I think is probably the CIO position, and even just technology leaders in general, I think are better positioned actually to go through disruption and change, because that's what you've always done in your career anyway. Otherwise you wouldn't be relevant today in the role you are in. I was a COBOL programmer in 1987. If I hadn't reinvented myself and changed many times over and given up more sort of knowledge that I've, given up and forgotten more things I've ever learned, is the thing is that you would never be where you are today. So I think from the ability to reinvent yourself in the technology leader's position is in your DNA anyway. Otherwise you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. I do think though that one of the challenges, and this is where it gets tough, is when you have large operational management responsibilities, there's no forgiveness for the quality of those services. They have to run. They run our. We got to take orders and ship product and recognize revenue, and these services have to run. But at the same time, there's an expectation of building out new sets of services with more digital capabilities. And I think one of the challenges we run into is we think about this as a singular move. It's like, move this service from on-prem into the cloud and move this service from on-prem into the cloud, when actually the benefit comes together when you have enough services that have all moved over to the cloud. Now you're leveraging this best of breed ecosystem with all this innovation that is pulled into your organization almost unfortunately on a daily basis. I say unfortunately because what's happening now is it used to be, if you're all on-prem, you're managing the servers and the software. You may be a couple of versions behind. Some cases you could be a couple of years behind because you just don't have time to do all the upgrades and all the updates yourself. And at some point, your business folks are saying, hey, look, we need more capability. We're behind. This latest version has what we need, etc. And the IT and the technology function is behind where the business needs it to be. If you fast forward now what's happening is the technology is outpacing and outstripping the ability for organizations to keep up. And this is why change management now becomes the biggest challenge. It's the speed of change, the adoption of change. Technology leaders, we've been sort of built for change for a long time. The rest of the business functions haven't. They sort of have, their business processes don't change so fast, and they don't typically have so much new capability coming at them that they can't keep up. In this new model, where you have a modern reference architecture with the best of breed services, it's highly interoperable, you are now way out in front of the business. And now it really does become not an IT challenge or a technology challenge. It really becomes much more of a keeping the business needs to speed up.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you brought up a bunch of stuff there, right? You've got more teams probably accessing data and innovation than before, and you've got all this cloud resources available. I mean, how do you even manage that? Do you have just a single policy and then you push out to all the groups, or do you have to deal with groups differently from each other, from different business groups?
Yeah, I think that this varies, right? You don't want to have, you really need sort of things kept at a certain pace. You can't have one organization that's back here and one that's here, especially when you think about a value chain, because a value chain for any organization typically goes across versus, vertical. Yep. So you typically have to, and I think this is where when different leaders will bring a different mindset. Some people are sort of history majors and we've always done it this way. And then you've got others who are like, hey, there's better ways to do it, and let me show you. And that's why you need obviously new ways of thinking and new ways of operating being brought into the organization. Not because you've got bad people, it's just they don't know what they don't know in terms of what better looks like until they're shown. And then you have people that will resist that, and then you'll have people that will embrace that. And this is the strategy of the how. You want to figure out, okay, we got to get, who's not embracing and who is embracing, and how do we get those people? Because otherwise you spend a lot of your time just dealing with the political sort of resistance challenges. So I think the other thing that's also different is you also have to think differently about security, risk, compliance, things like that. You have to have a different approach to how you may have done that when you were all on-prem. And even more so now with sort of our mass remote work, because our attack surface is sort of exploded into sort of millions and millions of home offices. And there's enough stress going on in people's lives today that, the vulnerabilities have gone up significantly, and the bad actors will look to exploit those vulnerabilities. So, you have to think about security differently. But what I do find, and this is to your point a moment ago, is that the role of the CIO, you get this give back of time, which is what you would have spent sort of on the rear view mirror, all the things that you've acquired over many years or inherited from many years of investments, and you get to focus much more on where you're going, not where you've been. It's like a big anchor that holds you back, and you spend more time looking in the rearview mirror and caring and feeding for past investments versus you're looking in the, looking forward at what, where you're going. And that to me is all about where you can add more value as a CIO, is when you're closer to the customer, you're closer to revenue, you're closer to how the business runs and operates, because you have the bandwidth. It's not like you're over here saying, I don't know what I need to do. I just don't have the bandwidth to get there because I got to care and feed for all this stuff over here and migrate it at the same time. When you're there, and that I think is what holds a lot of people back, is they think about things moving in pieces. I'm like, you need to go out to the future, go out 3 years from now, start with a clean sheet in an unconstrained view and build your environment from the ground up. And what does it look like? Don't think about moving piece by piece. Then come back to where you are today, and then you're investing in a strategy of how you're going to get to the complete future, not one justification, one ROI at a time, because I think that's where organizations get bogged down.
So let's talk about the economics of this just a little bit. So, you talk about ROI. How is it easier now to be able to track those kind of costs and to find ROI in these projects?
I think so. I think that it's, of course, the challenge is a little bit more. It's much more OpEx than it is sort of CapEx and so on, which can be a little bit trickier for companies to switch sort of the financial models there. But I think that one of the things that is different is the way you think about ROI. It's not an apples to apples comparison. You can't think about investing in some sort of physical assets and then managing a depreciation schedule and figuring out what their ROI is over 3 years, because this is the cost of not doing it. It's speed. What's the cost of speed? What's the cost of agility? What's the cost of productivity? What's the cost of having an architecture that allows you to integrate and turn on some new machine learning services that are now coming out or available, or some digital labor, turning on automation? You have to have an architecture that allows you to do that and allows you to do it very, very quickly and very, 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 very fast, and with not a lot of, this is where you get a lot of the sort of fail fast. When you have this model, you can do a lot more A/B testing. You can do things in parallel. You can turn services on in parallel to running your existing services. Then you can see how, and the change management happens at a gradual pace. If something doesn't work, you can turn things off. the pace of which you can experiment, the pace of which you can do proof of concepts, the pace with which you can turn on a new machine learning service into your organization, the way you can turn on automation, and it's all heading to more and more digitization and automation. You can't do that when you have the old architecture. Like I said, it's not one is right, one is wrong. You're just built at different times. You just don't get the speed, the agility, the flexibility, the innovation that you get in this new model. What's the ROI on that? Well, you could say, as I mentioned earlier, 50% of the Fortune 500 companies haven't made the transition. Or sorry, have disappeared off the Fortune 500 list. It depends company to company, but personally, I think that the ROI in some cases is really about business survival for the future.
Do CFOs buy that argument?
So here's what I think depends again on whom the CFO is, but I will tell you now, most born in the cloud CFOs do, because they immediately get the value of having an environment like this. And I've heard more and more conversations with other technology leaders and CFOs, even CEOs, that are now saying, now I recognize the value of investing in these cloud-based services with this big switch to remote working. It's like, shoot, now I know why we have these services, because we just what we did is just picked up and moved locations. And what's happening as well is companies that don't have these are accelerating their window to decision, to approval for an investment, because the ROI window is now not so much about, okay, I'm going to spend this much and save this much. It's like, look, my left arm is on fire. We need to be more resilient. We need to go invest in these services that are going to allow us to do that. So I think in some ways, for all of the bad that's come from COVID, there are some things that we're learning that are better than the way we were doing things previously, and we're going to come out of this stronger. That's for sure. I know that. It's just where we land in that hybrid state, I think, is still a little bit wait and see.
So you're saying it only took a global pandemic to turn lights on some of these ideas?
Well, if you tried to do it independently of COVID, like, hey, as an experiment, we're all going to work from home next week, it would have been a weird experiment. But when everybody's on an equal sort of equal playing field or an equal platform, and everybody's working remote and figuring this out collectively, wisdom of the community here, wisdom of the crowd, we're figuring out that there are much better ways to do things. We just would never have been able to pull them off without a disrupting event like this.
Great. Well, thank you for your thoughts. I want to close with just a couple of quick questions for you. I'm going to fire them off at you. Just answer as they come.
Yeah.
You ready for this?
Yes.
Favorite book?
The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
Who in your life had the biggest influence on you?
Someone who others would know, or just I would know?
Doesn't matter.
A gentleman by the name of Bill Heil.
Fair enough. All right, here's one, should be right up your wheelhouse. Biggest reason why people should consider volunteering?
Oh, I am such a big believer that what is the point of working hard, learning, gaining knowledge, where all we're doing is receiving, in early parts of our career, we receive. Yep. It is extremely important that we give back, and we give back knowledge, we give back time, whatever it might be, especially to people that are young in career and trying to figure out their pathways into professional careers. We have such a tremendous opportunity with our networks and our experience to bring, to help the next generation of workforce. And for me, that's a big passion of mine, because I think it's just something that if you earn all this sort of, call it, knowledge and wisdom and experience, and sometimes the experience is what not to do, not what to do as well. I think it's if not even fiduciary, I think it's sort of it should be a mandate that we should give back what we've learned.
Fantastic. And last one, best business advice you've ever received?
I don't know if I call it business advice, but I say it's more of a thing to remember, and that is get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's not going to change anytime soon. As I said before, the pain of change is mandatory. It's the suffering that's optional. And if you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less. And I think the slowest rate of change we'll ever experience is the one we're experiencing now. I think that sort of, when I zoom out, I sort of sum it up with those learnings, I guess.
Great. Well, thank you for your generosity. We appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Hope you heard a few things that triggered some new thinking for you. We do these conversations on IT topics weekly, so please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get updates on new content, as well as you can post comments and, more importantly, suggest topics that you'd like us to address. You can see that we have some pretty amazing resources. So please let us know how we can help you on your upcoming digital transformation and enterprise IT projects. Thanks very much. Until next time.